Today we're going to look at question 4 from the 2016 free response exam. It's called StringFormatter. Okay, so first of all, I want you guys to go to my course website and you're going to download 2 files. I've put a link in the description. So the first file is this 2016 PDF that's got the question in it. And then the other one is question 4, so you're going to go over here and get this formatter.zip. So that has the BlueJ project folder inside of it. All right, so once you've got those 2 files, let's go ahead and take a look at the question. So I've got it right here, and this is question 4. And this is rather an interesting one because it looks pretty complicated. So if you're looking at this and you're reading through it for the first time, you may think that this is going to be a real tough one. It is a little bit challenging, but some parts of it are pretty straightforward. And the other good thing is it has 3 parts. So you have a part A, B, and C, so you can pick up points, in some of these, even if you miss the later ones. Okay, so please go ahead and read through the question on your own and make sure you understand it, and let's get straight to the coding. So first of all, we're going to work on this part A, and we're given a list of words, and really for part A, all they want you to do is just go through that array list and just return how many letters there are in total in all those words. So that's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get rid of this. And here's my code. So I've got my BlueJ project folder here. And the method we're going to do, so part A is total letters. So we're given an array list, and we just need to go through and sum up how many letters there are in every word in that array list. Okay, so let me make a variable, so I'll just call it result, set it to 0. And now I've got a loop across that array list, right? I could do it in one of 2 ways. So I could use for loop, but I think I'll use a for each loop just because it's a little bit easier. So the data type is a string, and I guess I'll call it item. And then, we're just looping across everything in word list. Okay, so, we look at the word, and we say, okay, how do we determine how many letters are in that word? Well, we just use .length. So I just say, okay, result plus equals, and then I just do item.length. And that will tell me how many letters are in that particular word, and then just sum everything up into result. So once we're done with all that, we just return result, and that's it, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this works. So I've got my test bench here, and let's go ahead and run it. I think that's right. So just think about what the question mentioned. Here this is 14 letters in AP Comp Sci Rocks, and Green Eggs and Ham are 15, Beach Balls 9. Just double check. Yeah, 15. Okay, so 14 and 15 and 9. I believe, we did get a 14, 15, and 9. Okay, so that's correct. So really no problems there. I think most students would have gotten that without any issue. Okay, so now comes the tricky stuff. So part B is where we have to write this method called basic gap width. So with every, okay, so you're gonna get a number, I think it's called formatted length, yeah. So they say, okay, so we have this number, and this could be anything. I think the first one, it's 20. I think they usually put a 20 in. And they say, okay, we got some word lists, so given the quantity of words in this word list, and then some number like a 20, how many spaces would be put in there? So what would the gap width be, given that we want to put all the words from the word list into a space something like the size of 20? Okay, so if that's the case, you're going to have words, and obviously you're going to have some gaps there. So just going back to the example, you have this AP Comp Sci Rocks, right? So you've got a space. So here it's kind of subtle because they don't mention it, but here we have 20 spaces, right? So there's a formatted length of 20 that they want to fill. So if you put each word in turn, how many gaps are there? Well, I guess there's 2, right? The reason is because you have a formatted length of 20, you have total number of letters in this array list 14, so 20 minus 14 is 6, and they say, okay, what's the number of gaps? Well, Obviously looking at this, there's 3 gaps. Therefore, 6 spaces, 3 gaps. So if you divide 6 by 3, you get 2. So that's how they came up with that math. I recommend you sort of go through and read through the question on your own and, see if you can come up with that same number. Okay, so that's the math. So, the other, we have to go and solve it, right? So how do we implement that math? So it seems to me that we need to figure out the number of spaces, and then we need to figure out the number of gaps, and then, just spaces, integer divide gaps, and then there we go. That's our basic gap width. All right, how do we get the number of spaces? Well, it seems to me we're given this formatted length number, and if I just say, all right, well, we have the quantity of words in the word list, so it's not going to be like hard to just say, okay, however many spaces or characters were given in this formatted length, we just subtract off the total number of letters in this word list, and that should give me the number of spaces. So go ahead and do that. So int spaces, and I would just say, all right, well, it's just going to be formatted length. So, in the example question that's 20, we just say, all right, subtract off the number of letters from the word list, and then that will give me the number of spaces. So how do I get the number of letters? Well, it seems to me that we already calculated that. We already figured that out up here, total letters. Okay, so let me just run total letters, and then I just give it word list, and then that should give me the number of spaces. So how do I determine the number of gaps? Well, in the question, I think they said something like, we have this AP comp sci rocks, how would you figure out the number of gaps? Obviously, just by looking at it, I can see there's 3, but from a mathematical standpoint, I think it would just be 1 less than the number of words in that array list. Here we got 4 words, the number of gaps would be 3, right? Here, green eggs and ham, again, you have 3 gaps because there's 4 words, and then beach ball, 1 gap. So it's just going to be 1 less than the number of words in the array list. So that's pretty easy. Although, to be fair, in an exam situation, it might be a little bit hard to see that. Okay, so num gaps, and then we just say, all right, well, just word list.size -1. All right, so then we just say, all right, well, just take the number of spaces and do an integer divide with the number of gaps, and then that will be your basic gap width. So that's the math here. So just return, and then I just do num spaces, and then integer divide num gaps. Okay, so if my math is correct, if my logic's correct, then I believe that would give me your basic gap width. So let's go ahead and see if my math checks out on the test, and I think that's right. Yeah, number of gaps between words is 3. Number of gaps between words here, get another 3. Number of gaps is 1. I think that's right. Let me just check. So we get, number of gaps 3, number of gaps 3, number of gaps 1. So that's the math, and it seems to check out. Okay, then they talk about part C. So I had to put in this leftover spaces method. I kind of had to go and figure it out, because in the question they say, part C here, they say go ahead and write this format method. And they say, well, we've already given you this leftover spaces thing. So they're kind of kind in this sense. They don't make you figure this out. But I went ahead and figured it out. It wasn't too hard. So we're going to use that leftover spaces method when we go ahead and write the format, which we need to do for part C. Okay, so here it is. So we need to run format, and it returns a string. So essentially what this is going to do is produce take this word list and produce an output similar to what we saw in the question. So let me just go back, roll back, and it'll give you something like this, where you get the words, and then the required number of spaces, thinking about the basic gap width, and then the leftover spaces. So it should come out like that. Now, when I was making the test bench for this, I realized that I couldn't really see spaces, right? So I couldn't do it in that manner. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to put a capital X wherever there should be a space, and that will tell me that it just makes it a lot easier for me to see the spaces. So just a small modification there. Okay, so let me go ahead and see if I can write it. So what do I need to do here? It seems to me I'm going to have to loop across word list, and then I'm going to have to stick in however many spaces I need to in order for this to work. Okay, so let me make a string results first of all. So string results, it's the empty string. And I need to do a couple things. So first of all, I need to figure out the basic gap width. And fortunately, I'm able to do this because I figured it out with this method. So I don't have to rethink that. I can simply run that. So, okay, so int gap width. And then, just run basic gap width. And I believe I have to give it two things. So word list format. Okay, so I just give it these two items as arguments, formatted len. Okay, so that'll give me my basic gap width. Now I need to figure out how many leftover spaces I need to put in there. And fortunately, they give us this method. So they say, okay, this will figure out leftover spaces for us. So that's a very nice thing. So leftover, okay, that's fine. And then I just run leftover spaces, and again, I give it word list, and then formatted len. Okay, so now I have enough information. So what I need to do is loop across this array list. I need to pull out each word in turn, and then after each word, I need to put in the basic gap width. Once I've done that, then I can go ahead and take care of any leftover spaces, and then I just return that result string. That's my, the algorithm I'm thinking of. So let me make a loop. So I'm going to loop across this for int I get 0, right? I less than word list size I plus. Okay. Now I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to fix this a bit. I think it's just a little off, but I'll come to that. All right, let me take care of this putting spaces in there. So what do we have here? We have a gap width. So first of all, let me put the word in. So let's say results plus equals, and then word list get I. So that gets the word, puts in a result. Now I need to put in an X corresponding to every single space. So the number of gaps, we have a gap width, that's the number of spaces I need to put in after this word. So with, I'm a Python programmer too, so with Python this is ridiculously easy, but fortunately this is Java, so it's a little bit trickier. But I think what I need to do is put in a for loop, or something like, let's see, for int, I can't use I have to switch to j. J gets 0, j less than gap width, and then j plus plus. Okay, so I do a small loop, an inner loop, and then I simply tack on an x whenever I go through this loop, so just result plus equals x. Okay, so that will put in the number of x's corresponding to the gap width. Okay, now we got this leftover. I'll put a pin in that for now. Let me just see what that looks like. So return result. Okay, so let's just do it bit by bit and see what we get. So what's the outcome here? Okay, AP, XX, comp, XXI, XX rocks. Okay, so I see the problem here. Just, if you compare it to the question, we're supposed to get this AP space comp space sci space rocks. If you look at the outcome here, I mean, I'm getting 2 extra spaces on the the end here. So this is why I use X's, because I can clearly see that. If I just put in blank spaces, I probably couldn't see that error. So that's one problem that I need to take care of. The other problem is I don't have the leftover spaces incorporated. So green eggs and ham, I need to put in an extra X here and here, but not here. Okay, so let's do the leftover spaces first. So let me just go back to the code and say, all right, how am I going to incorporate leftover spaces? Well, they say that you start from the beginning of the word, and if you have leftover spaces, just kind of put them in until you don't have any anymore. So I think I can just use a conditional here and say, all right, well, if I have some leftover spaces, so if leftover is greater than 0, then I put in an X, result plus equals X. That will put in an X, which corresponds to a space. So I've used one, and now I've got to subtract one, right? So I decrement leftover, so leftover minus minus. And then, if I run out of leftover spaces, then, it'll simply, don't have any more, so this conditional won't run. I think that'll take care of leftover spaces. So let me go ahead and run it. So compile, run. Okay. And I think it works. So just comparing it with the question, we got this green eggs and ham, and I think it did work. So green eggs and ham, 2 X's, 2 X's, single X for that second to last space. All right, we still have this problem, with this spaces showing up at the end. That's really not supposed to happen. The spaces should be internal. They should not show up at the end of the word. So now that's the final thing I have to fix. All right, so what am I going to do here? Well, I think the problem is this. The problem is I'm looping, across every word, and, that's not something I should do. What if I stopped here? So what if I said, okay, loop across every word except for that one? That will give me the internal spaces. It won't give us the word at the end, however. So here's what I mean. What if I, instead of going from 0 to wordlist.size, what if I went wordlist.size minus 1, right? That'll take care of one problem, but it'll introduce another. So let's go ahead and run it and see what we get. Okay, so we've got our internal spaces working just fine. However, we lost the last word. So we need to take care of that somehow. Okay, I think the easiest way to do this is just say, well, just go through the loop and take care of the spaces. However, once you're finished with this loop, just tack on the last word in that word list. So why don't I just do this and say results plus equals, and then I just pull out the last word from word list. So just word list.get, right? What is the last word in the word list? I've got to figure out the length and take a -1. That gives me the index of the last word. So it's just word list.size, and then you subtract -1, and that is the index for the last word in word list. Okay, so after all that, let's go ahead and check it and see if we get the proper answer. And I think we might. Yes. Okay, so now we have something that looks like the result in the question, or what we're supposed to be getting. So, here and here and here, and that looks good. Okay, so there's one final thing. I do have a JUnit test bench set up, so let's go ahead and run that and see what we get. So run tests, and I have all 10 green checks. So that tells me my code is fine. Okay, so that concludes the question 4 from the 2016 free response exam. It is complete. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.